morning. Welcome to Viewpoint, your program of personalities, politicians, and perspectives. You know, oftentimes the old boy, when he comes up with that introductory line there, talking about politicians, I'll say something snide. And I mean this very seriously, Judith Kay. There's no reason I could say anything snide about the politicians we have with us today. Oh. They serve us and have served us, and I'm not trying to stroke them because I'm not looking for any votes or anything. I don't have anything pending before them in legislation, but we're just doggone lucky to have, and I'll let you introduce the guest.
Thank you.
Yes.
Beneficent. With us today are two lustrous guests. My goodness.
I would agree
We
with
have
that.
Tim Butler, who represents us in the House in Springfield, and we have Sally Turner. And I've known Sally for years, I think, by now. And Sally Turner is from here, of course, and she is our senator in Springfield. Thank you, people, so much for coming here. Sally, when you pulled in, you said something about your drive, and I harked right back to the redistricting business. Now, do you think it'll fly, and do you think it will be helpful to you so that you don't have to drive from here to Timbuktu?
Well, I don't
God
know.
knows what they'll do out there.
What's that, Bill?
God knows what they'll do.
Yeah, well, we're not all sure how that's going to happen. We propose that it's a perhaps a commission that makes that decision, not your local politicians or not your grander politicians that make those decisions. There's a lot of folks out there that feel that they're not represented by the districts that are drawn now. So we'd like to see groups that come in and individuals from communities and that say, you know, we'd like our districts to be drawn with our values that are intact. So, such as if they drew us all the way up to an area that was in industry and urban, they probably won't have the same ideals and thought processes that we would have down in our local area. So you don't want to send a person to be a representative that's not going to represent your interests.
Right.
It should be your interests, not our individual interests. And you know, you have to look at like the interests in one area that's urban as opposed to an area that's rural are going to be totally different interests. So that makes it difficult.
Maybe I could ask you people to kind of define for us the gerrymandering business.
Now, Tim's the one you need
Tim
to ask
is
about this.
snickering.
He's on top of this.
I don't think you can do it a lot of times.
Well, he's a leader in
Representative
this,
Butler.
so.
I'm not a leader in gerrymandering, so.
No, a leader in the redistricting process.
Well, first of all, let me say thank you for having us on today, and it's a pleasure
Thank
to be
you.
here with Senator Turner, who's been on the job for a little over 2 months now, I guess.
That's a
And
term I enjoy using, Senator.
I'm Bill. I'm telling you, I couldn't have been more happy when Sally raised her hand and decided she wanted to throw her name in to replace Senator Brady, and it's been Sally and I have been friends for over a quarter century, and it was really I couldn't be more pleased with Sally being picked to be the senator, my senator, your senator. From this area, and we make a pretty good team. We're good friends, and we work a lot together. We've already been in a lot of meetings together. We were on a Zoom call yesterday. Yesterday about some water issues in the southern part of the district and everything, and so it's really been a pleasure to get her on board in the Senate. So
Well, bless your heart.
happy to have her on board. You know, the redistricting thing, I'm going to leave here, and at 10 o'clock I have a online hearing on redistricting. I'm the top Republican for the House Redistricting Committee, and as I'm sure a lot of people know, this is after the decennial census. Every 10-year census, we do redistricting across the country, draw new congressional boundaries, new legislative boundaries, down to the local level. If counties that have county board districts, or even down to the precinct level, will get redistricted and things like that. And it is it's certainly an interesting process, and I think it's frustrating for a lot of people to realize. And as with Sally's point, you know, our legislative districts don't usually get drawn with existing governmental boundaries in mind, whether that's villages or cities or counties. These districts get drawn for pure political reasons, and whether it's Democrats or Republicans, we've both been to blame for carving up communities and districts and things like that.
With malice toward all.
Well, yeah, true.
Sure.
And I made the point. I was at a House redistricting hearing on the south side of Chicago on Saturday at noon, which was sparsely attended, by the way. But I was there, and I made the point to the handful of people that were there. Their neighborhood, where I was at on the south side of Chicago, which has multiple house districts that kind of come into the area. We were on 95th Street. A couple of those districts that represent that neighborhood go north. These little slivers, these spaghetti strings that go north all the way to the Gold Coast. So, for everybody that knows Chicago, the Gold Coast is north of the Loop.
Yeah,
and it's one of the richest addresses in Chicago. And I told him, I said, look, I'm a downstate kid from Central Illinois, but I know the Gold Coast ain't the south side of Chicago. That's how they've divided up these districts, to divide up communities and divide up neighborhoods. And I also use the example of my own district and Sally's district, where I live on the north end of Springfield. I live a couple blocks into my district on the north end in the Lincoln Park neighborhood. My neighbors who are in my same aldermanic ward to the south of me, just a few blocks, their state representative lives in Decatur, because the lines are drawn between, within our aldermanic. And I think people really get frustrated when, somebody who lives a few blocks from me, who knows me, all of a sudden realizes I'm not their state representative. And I think that's really, it's frustrating for the process, and we're going to see it carved up again this year. I'm sure the Democrats will draw maps that carve up neighborhoods and carve up communities, and it's really, I think it's unfortunate. And
well, in truth, that the direct result, is we now have Senator Turner. Senator Baumke was our senator
Correct.
Prior to this, and they carved him up, so they had him going clear to Quincy.
Well, Bill Mitchell had a large section of the area that I have in the House, back under that previous map and everything, and
they just carved it up.
And I think that's the other frustrating for people is you get used to having Tim Butler or Sally Turner as your person in the legislature, and next thing you know, you got Joe Blow from somewhere else that's your state rep or something. So.
Well, and also I will say that back in 2000, I don't know if you guys remember, in Logan County, we went from at-large county board districts to districts. And when we did that, we formed a commission, and we studied those areas, and we divided up based on township lines, which was really important. And we tried to only cut where we had to for population for each district to be equal. And so isn't that basically the same idea?
It is.
Really, except on a larger scale.
Correct.
And of course, since time immemorial, I think those lines have been drawn because the line drawers would benefit more from the line being here than they would from the line being there. So what the hey, if you're the guy in power, make a line.
Absolutely. I think, and I use my House district especially as an example all the time, and to a little bit lesser extent Sally's Senate district. But my House district was drawn to pack Republicans into the House district, which is fine by me.
Yeah.
But on the northwest corner, which is now represented by Representative Luft out of Pekin, and the southeast corner, which is represented by Representative Scheer out of Decatur, they drew those two districts to try to elect Democrats 10 years ago. So they packed Republicans into my district, but drew two districts on the corners that they tried to elect Democrats. I mean, it's completely done for partisan purposes. And when you look at, especially when you look at the districts emanating out of Chicago, like the ones I was talking about, and you'll see they put the roots down on one end in the city, and they reach them far out into the suburbs to try to dilute pockets of Republicans. Really, 10 years ago, that's what they did. So they'd reach districts out of the city into the suburbs to try to make sure that Democrats get elected, and that's what's happened largely.
Well, speaking of reaching out, we can't do this program without sponsors. So we will reach out to the sponsors right now, and then we're going to get back to serious politics. Right back live in the studios here. The program is, of course, Viewpoint, that vaunted highly rated, Nielsen rated show that two of you listen to out there.
Sometimes he dreams.
Our guest this morning, and I'm serious about this remark. We have a little fun up here, but I'm very serious. You folks out there who go to the polls are very lucky to have. We have our newly appointed state senator. Used to be one of the great clerks we ever had in the Colgan County Courthouse. And now Sally has been smart enough to raise her hand and say she would make herself available after the vacancy occurred. And she's now been appointed our senator. And the boys and the girls that did a heck of a job, I think. And a young gentleman who lives alongside the nice park there in the north side of Springfield, wave him down every once in a while, try to get a beer or something, but I never catch him in the backyard. We have Tim Butler with us today. Tim is one of those representatives who takes his job seriously, doesn't dream up dumb bills just because he's in the House. He's just a guy who works hard for you, and he's not a stranger in his district, and he covers it well. And so we salute you, sir. We appreciate your taking your time. And Sally, I know that you were busy washing the dishes this morning. We appreciate your.
I left them in the sink from last night.
So seriously, our guest Tim Butler, representative, and Senator Sally literally Turner. 648-5510. Now some of you, and I want you to be nice to them. Just because they vote the same way I do doesn't make them perfect, but they're almost that way. No, seriously, you might have some questions. There's a lot of dumb things going on down there in Springfield. For instance, I'll start off the question here. This legislation they passed about 4 in the morning that the police officers all over the state were opposed to. Which one of you would like to open up the subject about that?
Yeah, fortunately, Sally wasn't quite in the legislature when that passed.
Yeah.
That was back in January, at the very end of the lame duck session of the 101st General Assembly. That's the day that I realized, 2 days that I realized I could stay up for 40 hours straight. So it was, we were
That's incredible.
We were in session on one day. We went in session, early afternoon. Stayed in session until 4 o'clock the next morning and came back at 8 o'clock, 8 a.m. 4 hours later. And I went home at 4 o'clock for a little bit. And then Wendy said, "Why don't you get some sleep?" I said, "I'm not going to sleep because I won't get back up."
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
But that bill really, as with several pieces of legislation that passed in the lame duck session, are really, really, number one, poorly drafted pieces of legislation. I think there's a lot of mistakes in it, but just really legislation that was opposed by a wide variety of people. Legislation like that usually takes sometimes years to negotiate and evaluate and make sure you're not doing anything harmful to the state of Illinois. But this really it handcuffs, no pun intended, police officers. Really changes that. Gets rid of cash bail, which I think was not the right thing. Does a whole variety of things that really diminishes the work of our police and really I think will make Illinois a less safe state. And it's unfortunate that it passed. It's even more unfortunate the governor signed it. I mean, he had the ability to either outright veto it or mandatorily veto it, and he did not do that. And I think that was really the governor kowtowing to the majority in the General Assembly and not dealing with them, and it's unfortunate. And I think we really need to put pressure on the governor, especially to take a hard look at some of this legislation and veto some of these things.
Would it be safe to say, Representative Butler, that sort of legislation makes the streets less safe?
I think
because there's no cash bail business.
The no cash bail. I think there's a lot of concern about the fact that officers are really going to have a much harder time enforcing the law when, one of the things that's been brought up, if you have somebody on your front lawn and you call the cops really can't take them away. They can issue them a ticket or something like that. All sorts of crazy things in that legislation.
Well, that sort of legislation kind of reminds me of the infamous remark made by the Speaker of the House, we have to pass this so we know what's in it.
Exactly.
It just flies in the face of common sense.
And that really came up during the debate. The sponsor of this legislation and a couple other pieces of legislation that went through, I mean, they literally couldn't answer questions about what was in the bill. They were large pieces of legislation, 400, 500, 600 pages in these bills that were debating in the middle of the night that they amended, the Senate amended, and sent over to us that evening, so you don't have any time to read the legislation that's amended. And I think this is one of the things that frustrates people about the legislative process when they see legislatures do stuff like that. I mean, this is something that should have been, as I said, negotiated and drawn out over a long time. But I mean, it got jammed through in the middle of the night. It was
well,
ridiculous.
On a practical note, sir, we're lucky here in Lincoln, Illinois, because of geographics and so forth. And this second, we're lucky is we have a doggone good police department. Chief Adams and his folks do a heck of a job for us. So the danger, I think I'm going somewhere here, Tim. The danger factor in Lincoln-Logan County is not as bad as it is on the street danger as it is in some place like Decatur, Springfield, Belleville, East St. Louis, or whatever. So what those guys did when they passed that legislation, they made the work more onerous and less safe for a lot of people who wear a blue uniform. Am I correct in that?
I think you fit it right on the head, and it's less safe for the citizens of our state, and I think it makes it more dangerous for people who are in law enforcement or want to go into law enforcement. I've heard from many law enforcement professionals and mayors of some of my communities that say that they're already seeing the fact that people are not going to go into law enforcement, or they're going to move out of state. They're going to move to other states to go into law enforcement, and that means it's going to be harder to patrol our streets, and it's going to be harder to keep the order if people aren't going into law enforcement. It's and that's and it's we have to realize that this is a large, diverse state, and that the interest of somebody on the west side of Chicago might not be the interest of somebody in central Illinois. It might not be the interest of somebody in Cairo. I mean, it's we're all different, and I think it's difficult when you have the majorities that we have in the legislature that don't understand the entire state. Very honestly, I don't think they understand the entire state, and we what results is legislation like this, unfortunately.
If the both of you got a call and asked you, what in the world could you do to amend this process that obviously isn't working for one and all, what's the answer? What can be done?
Call your Democratic legislator.
Well, therein lies the problem. Now, I know I'm going to lose my job because we're supposed to be very neutral up here, but once in a while I just have to slip off the right side, fall down the right side. I'm never going to fall down the left side, you can bet on that. But seriously, am I all right, Mr. Ash? The partisanship exhibited down there, it is no good for the electorate in a general way.
Well, I will say this, and a lot of it I learned from Tim, but some of it I had with the mindset when I was county clerk. When I was county clerk, we were part of an association that was statewide, and no one knew what party each other were. We just worked for the good of what we needed to get done.
What a remarkable idea.
Yeah, I mean, it was actually very refreshing. No one knew. I mean, I remember thinking, wonder if they're a Democrat or Republican. Wonder, not do I need to know. And then when I came to the legislature, Tim was one of the ones that said, don't be afraid to reach out to the other side of the aisle. They have great ideas, and some of these people were Tim's best friends in the House. And he's the one that said, don't be afraid to reach out. And I did, and some of the people that he knew very well. And just the other day when there was a piece of election legislation, I went across the aisle during session to talk to the member that initiated that, to make sure that it had all the things in it that were right and that we could vote for as well. So I appreciate that, and I'm one to reach out, talk to other people. They have some of the same interests that we do.
Sure.
Absolutely. And Tim could probably elaborate on that a little bit more.
I think that it is partisan, certainly, but I do also think there are a lot of areas. There are a lot of issues that are more gray or middle of the road that you find some common ground on. Unfortunately, a lot of the big issues sometimes really get swallowed up in the partisanship. But I think, but I've really tried very hard to get to know people across the aisle. I get to know a lot of Democrats, and I mean they're, at the end of the day, I mean they're good people too. I mean they've just been misguided in what their thoughts are. But I mean a lot of them are, they're good people that have come from good families and are in it for the right reason, like Sally and I are, to try to represent the people and things like that. I think the larger problem sometimes becomes, like with some of these, like this police reform bill that passed, or a couple of these other bills that passed that came out of the Black Caucus agenda. It's we've got so much tension in this country right now, and sometimes if it's hard for those of us who oppose this legislation to speak out, because you get branded one way or another, and it's when we have legitimate concerns about this legislation, we're not questioning the fact that maybe some changes need to be made, but we don't think this legislation is the right way to do it, and when we get criticized for that, for speaking out about it, I think that's part of the problem. We need to be able to go into a legislative assembly and speak our mind and be able to present what we think our views are without being criticized for being whatever.
Well, that's why
part
you're
of the
there,
process.
isn't it?
Exactly. And unfortunately, that's not always the case in the legislature.
No.
And unfortunately, it's a test of friendship. For instance, I have a college professor. I respect him dearly. Really like him. Really respect him. He's on the other side of the teeter-totter. I just tell him he's wrong and then walk away. No, seriously. We all need to understand that the other guy, the other lady, they have the right to have their opinions too.
And they may be representing what their district, what those issues are in their district. Mm-hmm. And we are representing ours. But like Tim said, Illinois is so diverse. And then also we were talking about the sheriffs and the chiefs of police. I've met with many of them, and when you walk in their offices, that bill is sitting on their desk. Or I should say public deck. That's about 5 inches tall.
It's
and they're continuing to read it.
Trying to figure it out.
Yeah, because they're still trying to grasp it all. Yeah. And several of them, matter of fact, I met with Chief Adams and Sheriff Landers, and they were, they said the very first part of that bill, they were agreeable to. There was a big portion of it, and then in the middle of the night comes the second portion that just disrupted everything. And one of their problems is in regard to body cams, and body cams passed a long time ago to have body cams, and they're good with that. But one of the problems was they had to keep the tapes, if you will, or the electronic version of the body cam tape for a year and store it. And then when it had to go to court, there might be certain parts of it that had to redact, maybe if there was a juvenile on there or another person. Yeah. So that means they have to hire someone
to do that,
to do these things, and they don't have the money for the storage.
No. The storage, the cost of storage and video storage.
Chief Adams said
think about that. A
very
year,
expensive.
Yeah.
I mean, those cameras are on all the time, and you have to store it for a year after. I mean, the cost of that is enormous.
Which they're like, okay, we don't have a problem doing it, but we don't have the funds to do it. Mm-hmm. That's one of the bills that I've been working on.
648-5510. Now listen, folks. Senator Sally literally Turner is kind enough to give us some time this morning. Representative Tim Butler made an extra trip to get here from Springfield on time. So make their time worthwhile. Be nice to them. Be very nice to them, because they're very nice people. They represent us. We got a lucky draw here, folks, when we go down to the Springfield legislature, the folks that represent you and I here in Lincoln, Logan County. So be thankful about that, and think of a reasonable question. Don't be smart aleck with them. 648-5510.
All the farmers are in the field.
You know,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
Bill. When Sally got sworn in at the state capitol, and Judge Turner gave her the oath, and as Judge Turner said, it was the first time he'd sworn somebody in that he kissed them after.
I like that idea.
Glad to hear that.
You know, I made the remark that Logan County's been blessed over the years with people like Bob Olson and
Yes.
and Bob Madigan and John Turner and Ed Madigan and a lot of great people that have served this county, that have served in the legislature, and Sally's really in that vein. I mean, it's really public service and putting the interest of the people first. And you've got a lot of good, common sense, conservative people that represent the values of Central Illinois that have served you. And Sally kind of continues that tradition. It's good.
Did they welcome you, Sally? Did they give you, not because you're a pretty lady, but because you're a smart county clerk? Have you been welcomed, my dear?
Yes, but let me capitalize on the last thing he said about the kiss thing. So Tim was also sworn in.
John
by my
swore me
husband,
in
John.
6 years ago. Yeah.
But then Tim
Oh, is
said
that
at
a
my
fact?
swearing in,
I didn't think-
John said he was
I-
glad that he didn't have to kiss Tim.
I didn't think the justice was that old.
John was nervous when he swore me in.
Well, yeah,
He
tell him
was-
why.
He was
Getting
shaking.
there.
Yeah, it was an ice storm that day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
By the way, speaking of Justice Turner, we're lucky here. We have in Logan County, actually we have 3 appellate justices. One vicariously is Justice Jim Knecht, who lives up north Bloomington, Normal. But he's a Lincoln boy. He came off the streets of Sangamon Street and Chicago Street, and I watched him grow up, knew him well, and respect him a great deal. And, of course, Justice Tom Harris, his dad and I were 13 years in school together before we went away to college. Now you're thinking 4 and 12. We didn't flunk. we started in kindergarten, so we had 13 years to go before we went away to college. And then, of course, we have Justice Turner from right off the hill here in Lincoln, Atlanta. So we are lucky. We're quite lucky to have that kind of representation.
Yes. I was curious about something.
The reason that little like I apologize to Judy 45 times for talking too much.
You've been beating a dead horse.
For a few years. Yeah.
Yeah. I have a question. You know, every once in a while in the paper there will be a little write-up on a piece of legislation that they're dealing with in Springfield. And with all there is for you to do and to concentrate on and to worry about, how in the world do some of these things come about, like Senate Bill 153, which would require courts to appoint legal representation
that's
for
a good
cats and dogs? Get real.
I did the what?
Yeah.
It was for third-year law students to be able to use their 7-Eleven license to represent cats and dogs. And I'm like, what happened to the kids? I mean, we don't even have enough GALs to represent kids.
There you go.
Not that I don't love cats and dogs. I have a cat.
Well, we all do.
Tim has a cat.
I think
There's a
most
cat
of
over
us do.
there.
Yeah.
Not that
Boy, wait till I go home and tell my 2 cats that.
Yeah.
Oh,
I look
dear.
them
No
in the eye and
representation
say,
for you, buddy.
yeah, right.
Yeah.
I'm voting
Yeah.
against that bill.
Yeah.
Well, I mean,
But
that's kind of just, it seems to me like it's a clutterer.
It is, you know, I think at the, so we're in a new General Assembly that started at the beginning of January, and so everything starts over again, you know, bill introductions, you know, you reintroduce bills and things like that, new members get introduced bills. I believe between the House and the Senate, we had almost 7,000 pieces of legislation introduced this spring before the introduction deadline.
Well, you didn't have many passed last year, right?
Yeah, we only had, I think there was only 4 with COVID. I think there was only 4 laws that went into effect at the beginning of January. And so I think that's kind of like the old tree in the forest thing. Did we really miss out that much that the General Assembly wasn't in session? We only passed 4 laws.
You just wonder.
Which wasn't such a bad thing. Yeah.
But a lot of times legislation gets introduced. I'll have people from the district or approach me and say, "Hey, I've got this idea," and I'll work with them to try to introduce something. And I think I ended up introducing maybe about 25 pieces of legislation. Some of it has to do with I had several TIF extension pieces of legislation, things like that, stuff that has to get done. But I also know that I'm not going to try to push out 25 pieces of legislation. I've got a couple pieces of legislation I want to try to get done. But every legislator has the ability to introduce a piece of legislation, and most legislators have harebrained ideas on what they what they introduce, and that's I say this a lot of times about I get one of the things that I really get frustrated about are the mandates that we pass along to our schools from Springfield, and the fact that we have locally elected school boards that are supposed to oversee the policy for our schools, but we pass so much on to them, so many crazy ideas that our schools have to follow. And I was talking to an administrator yesterday from Minneapolis, and I told her, I said, the problem is legislators come up with a great idea for our schools, and next thing we know, it's a piece of legislation that gets introduced, and it's something like this. Obviously, somebody must have been looking at their cat one night at home and decided they needed a lawyer,
or they had too much sauce before they went to bed.
Yeah, really.
Either that, I guess that means we must have too many lawyers if we're finding more things for them to do. I don't know.
Don't tell my kid that.
Is there I don't know if this is a naive question or not. I really don't know. Is there a general feeling of goodwill in the legislature down there, Republican versus Democrat? Do they have a little camaraderie? Have a cup of coffee together, or maybe go to St. Nick?
I'll say for my part, remember, I'm the new girl on the block.
Sure, new kid on the block.
But I would say yes. I had several that called me or reached out to me. I mean, I called my fellow newly appointed Senator Doris Turner, who's just to our south.
The Turner Caucus.
Yeah, and it was cute. And one day in a committee, she said, "We need to start the Turner Caucus." Yeah. So, I mean, yeah, absolutely. There's several that have reached out to me and vice versa to establish some type of relationship. But through COVID, this has been very difficult. It's not like you can sit down and have a cup of coffee with one of them, because we haven't been able to do that. We're still doing the shield test. So next week we'll go in, and the House is going to do that as well. We go in and do the shield test, which is a spit in a test tube, on Mondays and Wednesdays, so that you can test negative, hopefully, to have session on Tuesday through Friday. So
is a technical session productive at all? Virtual is what I'm saying. I think a bit productive.
I think the virtual. Well, I guess it's how you define productive.
Well, yeah.
Because there's been a lot of legislation that's moved out of committee virtually, but it is really it is not. It's not good for the legislative process, because I tell people all the time, we're in the relationship business. I mean, you have to build relationships, and it's really and you got to get to know people, and it's really hard to build a relationship, especially with new members. We have a bunch of new members in the General Assembly. It's really hard to get to build a relationship with someone
on a Zoom call,
on a virtual call. The other thing is, one of the things that happens a lot in-person committee hearings, especially, or on the floor when we're in session, there's a lot of conversations that happen outside of talking into the microphone. Like, if we think there's a goofy bill that comes up in committee, I might just turn around to the chairman and say, "Hey, we got a problem with this," and and that stuff doesn't happen virtually, but it does happen. So I think the virtual stuff, hopefully, once we get past COVID, we don't keep this permanently, because it is not conducive to a better legislative process doing it virtually. I don't believe at all.
Would it be fair to ask if in the legislature down there in that is a beautiful building, by the way, our state house. But if somebody's going up that grand staircase and somebody's coming down on the landing there, the first landing, the legislation can be legislated there on the landing?
I guess it could be.
That happens all the time. And I make the point last spring, when we were in session in May, when the House was at the Convention Center, when we were at the BOS Center in Springfield, and there was a couple big pieces of legislation. We were trying to revise the gaming expansion legislation to make sure Chicago got their casino that they wanted and stuff like this. That stuff would not have happened if we had met virtually, because there were so many discussions that happened at the back of the room.
Sure.
Between members about how we're going to move forward on things, and I've seen that happen time and time again. And we are the General Assembly. We're supposed to assemble, in person. That's the idea. And it used to be, my fourth great grandfather, who was elected to the first 4 General Assemblies as the senator from Pope County, he rode his horse to Kaskaskia and Vandalia to assemble.
Now there's history.
I mean that we're supposed to come together. That's the basis of democracy, honestly, whether it's a city council or it's the state legislature or it's Congress. I mean, coming together and looking people eye to eye in person is the way to do it. And I think that's the way we should do it.
You mentioned the gambling, and if you drive down Keokuk or Woodlawn, anything that used to be a drive-up bank is now a little gambling establishment.
You got your video gaming terminals there.
Up and down and up and down. And I question to myself, how many do we need? And I know the reason behind them is tax money. But gee whiz, it's just a blessing that Springfield has the rest of us who have our little human weaknesses, and they can capitalize on that.
Well, your cities can
left and right.
Your cities can limit the amount that they allow to have in their city or in their county.
But it is. I mean, I think it's a good question: is how much is too much, and are we putting the resources in for addiction and things like that when it comes to gaming? And I think we need to get better with that. And I do think as we move forward with this, that we're going to have to take a look at, especially the video gaming side of it, to see are there limits we have to put in place? Are there the number of terminals? I think we have almost 40,000 video gaming terminals across the state.
Probably.
All feed money in.
It's big money.
And obviously, the tax revenue for the state, for municipalities is a big part of that. But I think at some point we're going to have to take a look at this and see. All right,
Well, the mayor of Whiteheads around the country, or in the state of Illinois would be, see an opportunity to get some tax money, and they say, let's do it.
And
what do we spend it on?
And it's I hate to say it's the easy way out, but you're not raising somebody's property tax or income tax by that, and that's why you look at some of these other sources of it, because it's an easier sell in a way almost. But
we
it has costs
already
that go along with
have some notoriety as a high tax state.
Yep, absolutely.
We have the most taxing districts of any state in the United States.
Right. Has it affected our population? Are people moving? Are they thinking, gosh, I can't hardly afford to operate my business here?
So I had a really good, when I was at this hearing in the south side of Chicago last Saturday about redistricting, there was a gentleman there who's trying to put a large economic development project on the south side. And I had a really good conversation with him afterwards about the fact that so many of the people who work in the south side of Chicago, south suburbs, actually live across the border in Indiana. And so when he talks, there's a big Ford plant on the south side of Chicago, and he said he thinks the majority of people that work at that Ford plant live in Indiana because the tax rates are lower in Indiana. Sure. The investment's happening. He said you drive, and I need to do this because I haven't been to that part of Indiana in a while, the northwest corner. But you drive across the border and you can see it, in the housing stock and the investments that are made and stuff like that. And a lot of that has to do with the tax base, the income tax tax, property taxes especially, are especially in that part of the state. I mean, they're bad enough around here, but in the south suburbs are terrible for people. And that's people make their decisions, especially people who are still working, who aren't retired. They make their decisions on where to live on economic opportunity, where there's jobs, and what the tax rates are. I mean, that's how people make their decisions, and I don't think we do a good enough job in Illinois realizing that that's how people make their decisions. And yeah.